I discovered my husband's secret family by chance. He had a double life, another child, and was stealing from us. It was a typical Saturday morning. I was in the grocery store, carrying my basket through the aisles when I noticed him. Simon, my husband, was standing in the produce area with a basket full of apples, but he was not alone. Next to him was a woman I'd never seen before, and between them was a young girl, no more than 5 years old, who called him Daddy. My heart stopped. I stood there motionless as the scene unfolded in front of me. Simon laughed at something the woman said, his hand resting on her lower back in a way that seemed all too familiar. The little girl tugged on his sleeve, pleading for a banana, and he beamed down at her as if she were the center of his universe. I felt as if I were witnessing a movie. This couldn't be genuine, but it was, and it crushed all I thought I understood about my marriage. I did not confront him there. I could not. Instead, I turned around and abandoned my card in the middle of the aisle, dashing out of the store before anyone could see me cry. When I came home, my mind was racing. How long was this going on? Who was the woman? And who was the tiny girl? Simon returned home a few hours later, acting quite normal. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day as if nothing had happened. I wanted to yell and demand answers, but couldn't bring myself to do so. Instead, I smiled and said everything was good, but inwardly I was collapsing. That night, while Simon was sleeping, I checked his phone. I'd never done anything like this before, but I needed to know the truth. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined. Texts, photos, even a calendar with a woman from the business. Her name was Delia, and the little girl's name was Mia. According to the messages, she is Simon's daughter. The next morning, I had a knot in my stomach. Simon had already left, Leah vying a note on the kitchen counter indicating he had an early meeting. I knew better now. I checked his shared calendar and discovered that he was going to have breakfast with Delia and Mia at a diner across town. My hands shook as I dressed and walked out the door. I arrived at the diner right as they were being seated. I sat in my car, looking out the window while Simon laughed with Delia and assisted Mia in cutting her pancakes. It was like watching the perfect small family, one I was not a part of. I experienced a range of feelings, including rage, betrayal, and a profound, aching sadness. How could he accomplish this to me, to us? I waited until they had left the diner before following them. Simon dropped Delia and Mia off at a little house on the other side of town and drove to work as if everything was okay. I sat outside the house for hours, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I gathered the bravery to knock on the door. Delia answered, her look changing from astonishment to suspicion when she noticed me. "Can I help you?" she said, her voice wary. I took a deep breath. "I'm Simon's wife," I explained, my voice quivering. Delia's eyes widened. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she stood aside, gesturing for me to enter. The house looked comfortable, with portraits of Delia, Mia, and to my horror, Simon. There were photos of them at the park, on vacation, and at what appeared to be a birthday party. It was like entering an alternate dimension in which Simon lived a completely different life. Delia offered me a cup of coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table. "How long have you known Simon?" I inquired, my tone barely above a whisper. Delia hesitated before sighing. 5 years, she answered. "We met at work. He informed me that he was divorced." I felt as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. 5 years. That meant Simon had been leading a double life for nearly half of our marriage. "What about Mia?" I inquired, my voice breaking. Delia gazed down at her hands. "She's his daughter," she replied gently. "He's been a part of her life since the day she was born." I wasn't sure what to say. My mind was racing as I tried to absorb what I had just learned. Simon wasn't simply having an affair. He had an entire other family. He had been keeping his family from me for years. As I sat at Delia's kitchen table, my head was filled with questions. "Simon, how had you kept this a secret for so long? How hadn't I noticed?" But before I could ask any further questions, Delia spoke again. "There's something else you should know," she replied, her tone cautious. She stood up and exited the room, returning moments later with a folder. Inside were legal documents such as custody agreements, child support payments, and even a will. My hand shook as I paged through them. According to the papers, Simon had been financially supporting Delia and Mia for several years. He had even designated Mia as his beneficiary in the event of his death. "He told me you knew," Delia said, her voice filled with shame. "He said you two had an arrangement, that you were okay with it as long as he didn't bring it up around you." I felt a flash of rage. "That's a lie," I replied, my voice quivering. I had no idea any of this was happening. Delia appeared shocked. I'm very sorry, she said. I had no idea he was lying to both of us. We sat in silence for a long time, digesting the severity of Simon's betrayal. Delia then said something that stopped me cold. There's something else, she explained. Simon has been discussing Leah VYing you. He stated that he wants to be with me and Mia full-time. I felt like I had been hit in the stomach. Simon wasn't only hiding his secret family, he intended to leave me for them. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to face him, shout, and cry for answers. But another part of me understood I had to be clever about this. If Simon could lie to me for years, what else could he do? I chose to acquire proof. Over the next 3 weeks, I chronicled everything: texts, images, and bank records. I even hired a private investigator to look further into Simon's secret life. What I discovered was surprising. Simon was not only helping Delia and Mia, but he was also transferring funds from our joint accounts into a hidden SAVYNGS account in Delia's name. But the biggest surprise occurred when the investigator discovered something I had never imagined. Simon has another child, a son, who lives in a distant state with another woman. It turns out that Delia and Mia weren't his only secret family. Armed with all of the information, I decided to confront Simon. I waited until he returned home from work one evening, his normal, cheerful, ignorant of the impending storm. I seated him down at the kitchen table with the packet of documents in front of him. "What's this?" he inquired, his tone light but his gaze watchful. "Open it," I murmured, my voice firm despite the rage building inside me. He stopped before flipping through the papers. His face turned pale when he understood what he was staring at. "Where did you get this?" he questioned, his voice raised. "I hired a private investigator," I said, "and I spoke to Delia. Simon, I know everything about her, about Mia, regarding your son in another state. I know you've been stealing money from us. I know everything." Simon looked at me, his expression a mix of shock and dread. For a little while, he said nothing. Then he began to explain, or rather, make excuses. "It's not what you think," he replied. "I never intended to hurt you. I got in over my head, and I had no idea how to get out." "You didn't purchase it, you didn't know how to get out," I repeated, my voice quivering with rage. "You have been lying to me for years, Simon. You've been levying a double, no, triple life, and didn't think it would damage me." He tried to apologize and beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't VYing it. "You don't get to apologize," I responded. "You can't act like a VY Tim here. You made your decisions, and now you have to deal with the consequences." I informed him that I filed for divorce and that I intended to take everything he had. He tried to reason and persuade me to give him another chance, but I was done. I grabbed a bag and departed that night, staying with a friend while I planned my future actions. The following few weeks were a blur of legal battles and mental misery. Simon fought me every step of the way, but the EVY Denke proved overwhelming. In the end, I received the property, the majority of our SAVYNGS, and complete custody of our children. Simon was ordered to pay child support and alimony, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to compensate for what he had done. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, but the emotional scars took far longer to heal. Simon attempted to stay in touch, stating that he wanted to be a part of our children's life, but I couldn't trust him. How could I after all he had done? I set stringent boundaries, only allowing him super VY said VY sits. Delia contacted me several times, apologizing for her role in the issue. She admitted that she had no idea Simon was married when they first met, and by the time she found out, she was already in too deep. I didn't really blame her. Simon lied to both of us. I focused on reconstructing my life. I returned to school and earned a degree in counseling so that I might help others in similar situations. It was therapeutic in a way, transforming my misery into something positive. My children were my rock throughout it all, and their tenacity and love gave me the fortitude to keep going. It's been 5 years since that day in the grocery store, and while the anguish hasn't totally subsided, it's become more manageable. I've learned to trust again, both in myself and in others. I've even started dating, but I'm taking things slowly. Simon, on the other hand, has not done as well. His lies caught up with him, and he not only lost me, but also Delia and his other family members. He's now alone, and while I feel terrible for him, I know it's a bed he made for himself. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that you have no control over what other people do, but you can control how you respond. I opted to turn my anguish into strength, and by doing so, I discovered a new sense of purpose. This event taught me that life is unpredictable, and even those you trust the most can betray in ways you never expected, but it also demonstrated how strong I am, how resilient we can all be when confronted with adversity. If you've ever been through something similar, please share your experience in the comments. How did you manage it? Now, to the next story. Story 2. My stepmother had hidden my late father's will, stealing my inheritance. Now that she came begging for help, I refused. My name is Jane Bailey, and I am 28 years old. My stepmother and younger sister, Rose, and I live in the house that my late father bequeathed to us. My life has never been easy in our family, but I've always tried to sort things out for the sake of peace. That night, everything changed. It was a large party. My stepmother, Helen, enjoys arranging these costly occasions despite her constant complaints about money. Guests packed the home, laughing, drinking, and flaunting their pricey outfits. I remained to myself, standing near the kitchen and avoiding the spotlight like I normally do. Then something happened. Rose, my 24-year-old sister, stood in the center of the Li Vying room, her voice loud enough to pique everyone's interest. "Oh, Jane is here. Look at her, always hiding in the shadows as if she doesn't belong." Her words sliced into me like a knife. Some attendees laughed uneasily, unsure how to respond. My face flushed with shame, but I did not answer. Rose understood how much I disliked confrontations. Helen joined in before I could slip away. "Well, maybe Jane doesn't belong here after all," she joked. "She doesn't contribute to anything important around here, unlike Rose." Helen smiled at the audience as if her comments were a joke. However, they weren't. I wanted to yell and protect myself, but I remained silent. No one knew I'd been surreptitiously paying Rose's college tuition for the past 2 years. She wouldn't have had her expensive degree without me, and now she's disrespecting me in front of everyone. After the party, I returned to my room, hoping for some peace and quiet, but Helen wasn't finished with me yet. She stormed in, her tone rough and cold. "You should pack your belongings and leave, Jane. This isn't your house anymore. You're just taking up space." I stood there frozen. How could she say that? My father left the house to me, but Helen had always acted as if she owned everything, and Rose took her lead. For the first time in years, I did not fight or cry. I just looked at her and replied, "Fine, I'll leave." But in my heart, I knew it wasn't over. They were unaware of the sacrifices I had made for them. They had no idea that their remarks were pushing me to the point of no return, and they had no idea what I was going to do next. My mind raced as I packed my things. Every memory of Helen and Rose's mistreatment played back in my mind. The sarcastic remarks, the frequent comparisons, and the way they always took me for granted. As I closed up my luggage, I felt the weight of years of quiet sorrow lifted from my shoulders. This house might have been my father's gift to me, but it had become a prison. It was no longer a home. Before Leah Vying, I went into my room and got the folder I'd concealed in the back of my closet. Inside were all of Rose's college tuition receipts, pro-Vying all I had done for her. I was not going to let her forget it. As I approached the front door with my bag, Helen and Rose were seated in the Li Vying room, sipping wine and joking as if nothing had occurred. Rose smirked when they spotted me. "Are you finally Leah Vying? It took you too long," she replied, rolling her eyes. I paused in my tracks to look at her. My voice was calm but forceful. "You know, Rose, I've always backed you. I funded your tuition when you couldn't afford it, so this is how you repay me," mocking me in front of everyone. Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" Rose asked. I held up the folder and dropped it on the coffee table. "Here is the proof. Every money I made to keep you in school. You didn't know, did you? Helen told you that was her right." Rose looked at Helen, her uncertainty rising to rage. "You told me you were paying for it," she shouted. Helen stood up and tried to maintain her composure. "That is enough, Jane. Stop trying to create drama and simply leave." I shook my head. "Oh, I am Leah Vying, but from now on, you are on your own. I will not pay another dime for either of you." With that, I walked out the door, Leah Vying them to face the truth. For the first time in years, I felt liberated. The next morning, I moved into a small but comfortable apartment on the opposite side of town. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. I began focusing on myself for a change, working harder at my career, meeting new people, and caring for my mental health. Meanwhile, things in the old house began to fall apart. Rose was unable to keep up with her college expenses and had to quit. Helen attempted to guilt me into assisting them, but I ignored her calls. One day, Rose texted me, "Jane, I apologize for everything. Could we talk?" I looked at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to forgive her, But another part of me understood that forgiveness did not imply returning to the way things were. I responded, "We can talk, but I won't let you take advantage of me again." When we eventually met, Rose burst into tears. She stated that she had been jealous of me for many years. She thought Helen's approval was all that counted, but she now realizes how toxic Helen's influence was. "I know I've hurt you, Jane," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right." Rose began working to repair our friendship. She really apologized and began working to pay her own way through school. For the first time in years, I recognized her as the sister I once cared about. Helen attempted to persuade Rose into turning against me again, but Rose had finally seen her true colors. When Helen realized she couldn't control us anymore, she fled town, leaving behind the toxic environment she had created. Rose and I gradually rebuilt our relationship, this time based on respect and honesty. I maintained my distance, focusing on my own ambitions and pleasure, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never allow someone to take advantage of me again. Months passed before things felt normal again. I had settled into my new apartment, concentrating on my profession and creating a life that was not centered on my family's instability. Rose and I were gradually restoring trust, and I admired her efforts, even if I wasn't ready to fully reintegrate her into my life. Then, one evening when I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello," I responded hesitantly. "Is this Jane Bailey?" a forceful voice said. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Margaret Gray with Greenfield Law Offices. I'm calling about your late father's estate." My heart skipped a beat. "Estate? I thought everything was settled years ago." Margaret hesitated. "Not everything. A situation involving your father's will has lately come to light. Would you be available to meet tomorrow?" I agreed, but I couldn't shake the impression that this call was about more than paperwork. The next day, I sat in Margaret's office, nervous. She handed me a bundle of documents, her face stern. "Jane, your father left a second will which was only recently discovered." Margaret's comments caused my heart to pound. "This will overrides the previous one and includes a significant inheritance, a trust fund, intended for you." My thoughts raced. A trust fund? Why didn't this come up before? "It was deliberately hidden," Margaret explained. "We suspect Helen hid it by claiming ignorance when the estate was first split. She probably didn't want you to use the money." I felt both angry and relieved. My stepmother had stolen from me, but now I had the opportunity to reclaim what was rightfully mine. "Can I access it now?" I asked. "Yes," Margaret replied with a smile, "and I believe you'll find the sum substantial. Your father wanted you to be financially secure." When I saw the numbers, my jaw sank. The trust fund held more than due law $500,000. The trust fund became widely known, and Helen soon returned. She arrived unannounced at my apartment, looking untidy and desperate. "Jane, we need to talk," she continued, her voice quivering. "There's nothing to talk about, Helen," I said, maintaining a chilly tone. "I know about the trust fund," she blurted out. "You don't understand how hard things have been for Rose and me. We need help." I looked at her incredulously. "You mean the same Rose you duped into turning against me? The same Rose who is finally learning to stand on her own without your toxic influence?" Helen's face flushed hot. "I tried to safeguard this family. Everything I did was for Rose's future." "No," I replied firmly. "You did everything for yourself, and you know what? I'm finished cleaning up your mess." Later that week, Rose called me in tears. "Helen is furious with me," she continued. "She thinks I betrayed her because I won't ask you for money." "What do you want me to do, Jane?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, her voice steady. "I simply wanted to let you know that I am done with her. I'm moving out and starting a job. I do not want to be like her anymore." Her words astonished me. Rose had finally accepted responsibility for her life. For the first time, I had a glimmer of optimism for our relationship. With Helen out of my life, I focused on building a future I could be proud of. I used a portion of the trust fund to start my own business, which I had been dreaming about for years. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced before. Rose and I stayed in touch and met for coffee or supper on occasion. She was becoming a better version of herself, and I was proud of her. Helen, I heard, left for another city, leaving behind the damage she caused. I did not feel sorry for her. She had reaped what she sowed. Looking back, I understand that being kicked out of my own home was the best thing that could have happened to me. It encouraged me to stand up for myself and stop allowing others to take advantage of my goodwill. Now I live a life full of peace, purpose, and the assurance that I am finally free of my stepmother's toxic control. Rose is finally learning how to stand on her own 2 feet, and perhaps, just maybe, we will be able to reconnect as sisters again. Thank you for watching.